Hey, hi, how are you? Welcome back to the e-learning series on hazard identification, assessment, and control. In this segment, we're going to cover yet another subject, and that's different hazard assessments. Why? Well, because nothing ever is the same and nothing stays the same. It's an important thing to remember that when we're doing hazard assessments, that it's based on continuous improvement. And so when we're doing this, we're gonna look at a few things. So we're going to need to use different methods when we're doing different hazard assessments. I know you're asking, doesn't one size fits all? I can see that. But here's my question back. What about a situation that is out of scope? Something that's not captured in your formal hazard assessment because your job hazard assessment, your JSA, JHA, your hazard assessment captures your normal scope of duties. You confused? Okay, well, let's take a situation like a manufacturing plant. There's a scheduled expansion and renovation going to occur, but operations are still going to take place. How do you assess the hazards and risk for this out-of-scope activity, the renovations, by using your standard process? It's simple. You can't. Just the same, let's say that you put your tool pouch down and go for lunch. When you come back to work, has anything changed? Are you going to use your normal job hazard assessment?
What do you mean?
I know, likely a bit arduous, don't you think? But if we look at it, we look at out of scope or out of the ordinary situations, we can't necessarily always use the job hazard assessment that you've done. It's a snapshot in time and things change. Now, just to be clear, the same methodology that we've gone through beforehand with the simple hazard assessment is usually applied in these different cases. Let's just do a quick review, shall we? Okay. So, just as a review, a hazard assessment is a procedure designed to identify, assess, and manage health risks and safety hazards in the workplace. That doesn't mean it fits into one box, one style. Hazard assessments come in many shapes and sizes, so to speak. And it's an important thing to consider all of that, because do I need to assess hazards all the time? As safety professionals, we've likely heard that question one time or another. Or that we've got work to do. We hear that as well. Well, as long as that work isn't creating hazards or making existing ones worse, then I guess we have nothing to worry about, do we? The big thing to consider here, though, is one size does not fit all. You have different tools in the toolbox. The same should be considered with hazard assessments. So what we'll do is we're going to look at four different hazard assessments. So let's jump in and have a look. And these are the different types of hazard assessments, each suited for a specific situation or purpose. And they are out of scope, sometimes referred to as a site-specific hazard assessment, or SSHA, or a field-level hazard assessment, an FLHA. You also have job-specific hazard assessments, high-risk or complex task hazard assessments, and then you have the informal hazard assessment. So what we're going to do is we're going to check out each one in depth. And the first one is the out-of-scope hazard assessment. And there, once again, like I've said, many different terms. For example, it's often called a site-specific hazard assessment. That's what it's referred to here in Alberta. But previously, it was called a field-level hazard assessment by Alberta OHS. And these are just to name a few. Then you have to consider that these hazard assessments are used for out-of-scope activities and situations. By out-of-scope, I mean situations that aren't part of the normal operations or normal duties performed by a worker, and they're not captured in your formal hazard assessment or your formal job hazard assessment. For instance, let's say at your workplace, there's a renovation taking place by a contractor, and the contractor's employees, of course. Not a normal everyday occurrence. So it's an out-of-scope situation. So an out-of-scope hazard assessment would be designed for your workplace to address the situations and any controls that your workers adjacent to the construction or within the immediate vicinity may need to utilize. For instance, there may be certain times of the day that workers may not be able to access the area because the activity is being performed. In addition, the contractor should be providing you with a schedule of their work so that you know if you have to adjust anything. And this brings me to my next point. The out-of-scope hazard assessment needs to be updated as conditions change. As I've said before, things change. Projects advance or progress, weather might be a factor, etc. So your hazard assessment needs to be updated. And of course, it needs to be signed off to follow best practices. Every employee or worker that has the potential to be impacted or exposed to the work and the possible hazards needs to sign off, acknowledging that they're aware of the hazards and the controls that they need to use to mitigate the risk. It's important for you to note, it's an acceptable practice to reuse the information by changing the dates. However, each piece needs to be reviewed by the parties involved to ensure continuity and ensure all the hazards are addressed and the relevant controls are being used. Think of it as copying and pasting, but with some due diligence thrown in as well. More about the out-of-scope hazard assessment. It doesn't have to be complex. In fact, it shouldn't be. Just using the simple note of hazards and controls. Identify the hazards, identify the controls. However, a few other things, though. It needs to be dated. A best practice approach, though, is also it should not be more than 48 hours old between reviews and updates. And of course, sooner if conditions change. Like once again, thunderstorms coming, whatever the case may be. Once again, it also needs to be communicated to all the workers involved and, if necessary, explained to ensure understanding. And I know I'm repeating myself, but it needs to be repeated. It needs to be signed off by all applicable workers. So now that's one type. Let's look at something else that's kind of similar, but slightly different. And that's a job-specific hazard assessment. Very similar to the site-specific hazard assessment, or SSHA, but they're tailored to a single job or project that's not going to take very long, and it may include in externals. Often they can be looked at as a job plan or part of a job plan. Sometimes they're even called a job safety plan. And as I said, they may involve an external or externals. An example might be like your organization working with contractors to complete a job. Say, for instance, your building operators are working with an external contractor to install a new rooftop HVAC unit. It's a short job, but there will undoubtedly be hazards that need to be addressed. They may change frequently depending on the state or progress of the job and the coming and going of work parties. And of course, dare I say it, the weather. And I can't say it enough. The KISS principle. Keep it simple. You know the last one. There's no need to make it complex. Note hazards, note controls, have all parties review and sign off, and then monitor the effectiveness of the controls. The next one we want to look at is the high-risk hazard assessment. These type of hazard assessments are often mandated by legislation, and at minimum, they have to identify hazards and, of course, controls. They usually are not required to prioritize or quantify the hazards because it's a high-hazard activity. These are used for high-risk, high-consequence activities such as working at heights and extreme heights, or like where fall protection is mandated, or confined space entry, and these are just to name a few. These activities usually require a step-by-step plan plus a hazard assessment. They usually require updating as conditions change, such as weather or project progress. Some more points to consider about the high-risk hazard assessment is this type of hazard assessment might require submission to an external party depending on your jurisdiction. Or maybe if you have a rescue agreement with the local fire department for, say, confined space entry or working at heights, they may require a copy. So once again, check with your authority having jurisdiction. Once again, they're used for high risk and high consequence activities. If your jurisdiction doesn't require them, you might want to require using them as a good way to mitigate risk. It also shows due diligence and safety leadership. The other one is they should never be regurgitated. Reused. Similar to what I talked about before with site-specific hazard assessments or out of scope, these ones are different. They have to be created each time. Okay? A new hazard assessment should be done for each new situation or job. And once again, they must be signed off by all those participating in the activities. In some cases, they also might have to be signed off and approved by authorities having jurisdiction. Check your jurisdiction to be sure. Now, another one is the informal hazard assessment. Informal meaning no form. Believe it or not, we do this frequently. We do it daily, even outside of work. Consider this. You're walking downtown. Usually, you look both ways before crossing a street. That's an informal hazard assessment. So at work, applying it's fairly simple. We're making an observation of the work area, the tools, the machinery, the environment, all of this prior to performing a task. We're checking for hazards and correcting them or ensuring established controls are functioning as they should. As an example, on a construction site, before I ever trust a guardrail, I grab it and give it a shake. It could be as simple as like checking a tool before use, making sure the power cord isn't frayed or broken and the guards are in place. No matter what, you shouldn't be interrupted by distractions because it interrupts the informal hazard assessment process. A good one is think cell phone. The most important consideration at work is to be on the lookout at work for hazards, and to do that, you need to practice your safety. Y-O-U-R, safety. It's Y-O-U-R, safety. The acronym means yield to your surroundings. In other words, make sure that you note your surroundings. Okay, don't just walk with your head down, looking at your cell phone or daydreaming. And especially if you have warnings, sounds, or any kind of administrative controls, don't have yourself hampered by earbuds. Yield to your surroundings. Then, observe the work environment. Okay? Look at the environment, look at the work that's going on. Then you understand the situation, understand what's going on, and react accordingly. It might be as simple as before you go down that set of stairs at a work site, grab the guardrail, give it a shake, check it, make sure it's good. And then look down the stairs and make sure that they're clear, then react accordingly. These are all simple rules to follow as far as the informal hazard assessment goes. But something else I want you to consider is, what if we were to make this an organizational fit rather than just one about the health and safety department? What I mean by that is it's often assumed that this is just the role for the safety professionals in an organization. Maybe even some organizations might stretch it further to the health and safety committee as well. It actually needs to be considered as something that's organizational wide. Everybody has to be involved. A hazard assessment is not one and done. Continuous improvement is what drives a successful hazard identification, assessment, and control program. Once again, your safety management system should be built on continuous improvement. What is working today might not be working tomorrow. So now, before we get into some quiz questions, it's important to remember your hazard assessments are the foundational part of your health and safety programs and your safety management system. So much so, they contribute to the other foundational elements. And so let's look at those for just a second, shall we? Hazard assessments are the foundational activity to health and safety. Everything else flows from hazard assessments. Take inspections, for instance. Your hazard assessments are a snapshot, but based on them, you should be using them to determine some of what you're monitoring in your inspection, such as things like safeguards and guarding. Are they still working? Is the use of control still happening? Are workers using safe work procedures? The other thing to consider is incident investigations. During investigations, hazard assessments should be some of the documentation that you should be scrutinizing, checking to see what should have been in place as far as controls. Often, incidents occur because of an absence of controls or a failure of controls. Once investigations are completed, often there are going to be some new controls or modifications to existing controls that are put in place. Some other points to think about. Contractor management, for instance. When you're hiring contractors, you need to set your existing occupational health and safety management system as the baseline on how you select contractors, who you hire, and how you manage them. Your hazard assessments are a big part of that. You should be comparing yours to theirs and looking, and yours should be the bar. Theirs might exceed that and go above it, but yours should be the bar that you set everything at. The next is, of course, work planning. And really, enough said, right? You need to be incorporating hazard assessments into all of your work and project planning. And then finally, believe it or not, hazard assessments also aid in performance management. Sometimes you have to manage those less than performers. But what about those folks who are not using controls? Your hazard assessments give you the material necessary to properly manage your team, your group or crew as far as safety goes. They list established controls, and if your people are not using those controls, it's your job to manage that lack of performance. And so, here we are, quiz time. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're not subscribed already, then what you need to do is you need to click this little button down here, and then that way, when the next video launches, you'll get notified, provided you click on the bell, of course. And if you're on the learning platform, there's a short quiz that you're going to need to take to ensure this module is complete. Once that's done, you can move. Well, guess what? Once this is done, you're done. You don't have to move on anymore. What you need to do is go and ensure that all your modules are complete, and you'll be able to print out a certificate. Oh, and for you folks on YouTube, you can check out this video up here. Remember, safety leaders, being a leader is doing the right thing in the right place at the right time, regardless of who's watching. Because you know what? Younger and less seasoned workers might be the ones that are watching. Your mistakes could be their injuries. Okay? Take care. Bye for now.